I was 14 the night my mother pointed at our house and laughed. Not because something was funny, but because she said something I will never forget. She lives in garbage. She wasn't talking about the house. She was talking about me and my father. My dad owned a small junkyard on the edge of town. Rusted cars, broken engines, metal piled higher than the fence. To my mother, it was proof that he was a failure, a man who would never become anything. That night she packed 2 suitcases, looked around the room one last time, and said she was done living in a trash. My older brother grabbed his jacket and followed her. And just like that, my family split in half. They left. I stayed. For 19 years people believed my mother had made the smart choice, and that I had chosen the wrong side. What nobody knew, not my mother, not my brother, not even the people who laughed at me in school, was that my father had been quietly building something inside that junkyard. Something so big that one day a lawyer would look at me across a table and say, "Your father left everything to you. $33 million. But the money isn't the real story. The real story is how a man everyone called garbage outsmarted them all." And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever looked down on where you came from, then this story is for you. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. In the comments, write just one word, stayed. Because this story is about the people who stay when things get hard. And if stories about quiet revenge, intelligence, and patience fascinate you, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You might think this is a story about money. It's not. It's a story about a sentence my father told me before he died. A sentence that explained everything. He looked at me, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Those who stay are the ones who inherit." But to understand why he said that, you need to go back to the night my mother walked out the door. When I was 14, my world smelled like rust, oil, and rain-soaked metal. Most people would call that miserable. To me, it smelled like home. My father, Daniel Carter, owned a small junkyard on the edge of town. From the street it looked like chaos, piles of broken cars, twisted frames, doors stacked like fallen dominoes. But my father never saw garbage when he looked at those machines. He saw parts. Possibilities. Value hidden inside things everyone else had already given up on. Every Saturday morning, before the sun was fully up, he would knock softly on my bedroom door in the tiny apartment above the yard. "Coffee's ready, Lily," he would say. Not loud. Never rushed. Just calm. We would sit at the small kitchen table, drinking cheap coffee while the scrapyard below slowly came to life with the sound of metal clanking and engines being dragged across gravel. My father rarely talked much. But when he did, his words always stayed with me. "Most people only see what something looks like," he once told me while removing a door from a wrecked car. "Smart people learn to see what something is worth." Back then, I thought he was talking about cars. I didn't realize he was also talking about people. And in our house, there was one person who refused to see any value in the life my father had built. My mother, Angela Carter, hated everything about the junkyard. The smell. The noise. The dust that seemed to follow my father everywhere. But more than anything, she hated what it represented. To her, the scrapyard was proof that she had married the wrong man. Angela believed life was supposed to look polished, nice neighborhoods, perfect lawns, neighbors who wore expensive watches and talked about promotions instead of engine parts. And my father never tried to be any of that. He came home every evening with grease on his hands and quiet patience in his eyes, as if the opinions of the world simply didn't reach him. But they reached her. At dinner she would stare at him across the table and say things that felt small, but sharp. "Daniel, do you realize our daughter smells like your junkyard when she goes to school?" My father would calmly keep eating. No arguments. No defense. Just silence. At first, I thought he was ignoring her. Years later, I understood something different. He wasn't ignoring her. He was studying the room, noticing things the rest of us didn't yet see. And that quiet observation would eventually change everything. The first real fracture in our family didn't happen during a fight. It happened during a dinner with guests. My mother had invited two couples from church. People she admired, people with nice clothes, polite smiles, and husbands who worked in offices instead of scrapyards. The table looked perfect. Candles. Clean plates. My mother had spent the whole afternoon preparing it. My father arrived late from work, still wearing his worn boots and a shirt stained with oil. He washed his hands in the sink and quietly took his seat. Everything seemed normal. Until one of the men asked the simple question. "So Daniel, what exactly do you do?" My father answered calmly. "I run a scrapyard." The word scrapyard hung in the air like smoke. My mother laughed. Not a polite laugh. A sharp, embarrassed one. "Oh please," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "He basically lives in garbage." The guests chuckled awkwardly. I felt my face burn. But my father didn't react. He simply took a bite of his food and continued eating. At the time, I thought he was swallowing the humiliation. But later I would realize something important. That night, while everyone else was laughing, my father was already making a decision. The real humiliation came 3 months later. It was a cold Friday night, and the argument started the moment my father walked through the door. My mother was standing in the living room with 2 large suitcases beside her. My brother, Ryan, 16 at the time, was sitting on the couch staring at the floor. My father looked at the bags, then at her. No surprise. Just quiet understanding. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel," my mother said. "I refuse to spend the rest of my life living above a junkyard." My father didn't raise his voice. "Where will you go?" he asked. "To a life that actually looks like something." Then she looked directly at me. "You don't have to stay here, Lily. You deserve better than this garbage." Ryan stood up and grabbed one of the suitcases. "I'm going with Mom," he said. The room felt suddenly smaller. My mother waited, watching me. But I walked to my father's side. "I'm staying." For the first time that night, something moved in my father's expression. Not relief. Something deeper. And as my mother walked out the door, none of us realized that choice would decide who inherited the future. After my mother and Ryan left, the apartment above the junkyard felt larger and strangely quieter. There were fewer voices. Fewer plates at the table. But the routine never changed. My father woke up at the same time every morning. Coffee at 6. Work by sunrise. And now, every Saturday, I worked beside him. School during the week was harder than the scrapyard. Kids whispered when I walked past. "Garbage girl." Some of them had heard my mother's words through their parents. Small towns carry gossip like wind carries dust. At lunch, I often sat alone. But every Saturday morning, when the metal gates of the yard rolled open and the cold air smelled like oil and steel, something inside me felt steady again. My father never talked about my mother. Never complained. Never explained. He just kept working, dismantling engines, removing parts, sorting metal with a patience that almost looked like meditation. Sometimes I caught him staring at certain car components longer than necessary, studying them carefully. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough. But slowly, I began noticing something strange. My father wasn't just scrapping cars. He was collecting something. The years after my mother left didn't explode into drama. They disappeared into routine. School. Work. Sleep. Repeat. At first, the loneliness felt heavy. Every holiday reminded me that half my family had chosen a different life. But my father never allowed bitterness to grow inside the house. He didn't talk badly about my mother. He didn't blame Ryan. Instead, he kept building something I didn't fully understand. By the time I turned 17, I could dismantle an engine faster than most of the men who worked for us. And my father trusted me with more and more of the yard. But there were still parts of the scrapyard he kept locked. At the back of the main warehouse, there was a reinforced steel door. He carried the key on a chain around his neck. Sometimes late at night, after the yard closed, I heard the sound of that door opening, then closing again. Metal moving inside. Boxes shifting. Once, I asked him what he kept there. He gave the smallest smile and said only one sentence. Things people throw away, before understanding their value. And somehow, I felt that room held more than scrap metal. When I turned 18, people started asking the same question. Teachers. Friends. Even neighbors. So Lily, what are you going to do with your life? What they really meant was, when are you leaving the junkyard? Most of them believed staying there meant I had no ambition. What they didn't understand was that the scrapyard had already taught me more about the world than any classroom. Value hides inside things people overlook. Patience multiplies results. And noise is often a disguise for ignorance. So instead of leaving, I made a quiet decision. I stayed. Not out of obligation, but out of strategy. I began watching my father more carefully. Not just how he dismantled engines, but what he kept. Certain catalytic converters were separated immediately. Certain electronics were stored in labeled containers. And once a month, always late at night, he opened that locked room. Boxes went in. But almost nothing ever came out. One evening I finally asked him a question. Dad, what are you actually building back there? He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding something important. Then he said quietly, "You'll understand when the time is right." And somehow, I believed him. While my world stayed small and steady, my mother's life seemed to grow brighter every year. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Through social media and the occasional rumor that traveled through town, I saw glimpses of the life Angela Carter had built after leaving. A larger house. Better neighborhoods. Pictures of dinners in expensive restaurants. My brother Ryan appeared beside her in many of those photos, wearing clothes that looked far more expensive than anything we owned. Sometimes classmates would show me those pictures with a smirk. "Your mom upgraded." I would nod quietly, pretending it didn't matter. But there were 3 moments over the next 19 years when my mother contacted my father directly. Not to ask how we were doing. Not to apologize. Each time, the call ended with the same request. Money. Medical bills once. A house repair another time. And a third time. Ryan had fallen on hard times. Every time, my father sent the money. No complaints. No lectures. Just a quiet transfer and a short message, "Take care." The first time I asked him why he helped them, he gave me a strange answer. Because people reveal their character when they think they're winning. At the time, I didn't understand. But I started noticing something else. Every time he sent them money, he would spend the next few nights inside that locked room. And whatever he was doing in there, looked less like saving scrap. And more like preparing something. By my mid-20s, I realized that life outside the junkyard was a stage, and my mother and brother were playing it poorly. Angela's ambition was obvious in every post, every conversation, every smug smile she flashed to the world. Ryan had fallen perfectly in line, chasing approval and comfort while abandoning the only people who had truly mattered. I never reacted. I never confronted. I stayed quiet, as my father had taught me. Instead, I watched. I observed patterns, the way my mother called only when she wanted something, how Ryan never acted without self-interest, the small cracks in their overconfident smiles. Every Saturday, I worked beside my father, noticing details in his methods, how he separated metals, cataloged items meticulously, and counted profits silently. I began keeping notes. Small, almost invisible notes about timing, purchases, and investments. The world thought I had lost. That I had nothing. But in silence, I was learning. And what I was learning would soon become power. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone watching. I began taking small actions, quiet, deliberate, and calculated. Every time my father added a new box of metals to the locked room, I cataloged it. Every shipment of precious scraps, every receipt for platina, palladium, rhodium, gold, silver, I noted it. I learned the rhythms of the scrapyard like a second language. How engines were dismantled, how metals were separated, how small investments turned into something greater over time. No one noticed. Not my mother. Not Ryan. Not even the employees who thought I was just the junkyard girl. I also began subtly monitoring the lands my father bought, small parcels of abandoned farms, lots sold for taxes, cheap properties no one wanted. To outsiders, it looked like nothing. To me, it was the blueprint of a fortune. And with each quiet observation, I began shaping my own strategy. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to yell. Because strategy speaks louder than anger. And I was ready to listen. For nearly 2 decades, everything stayed invisible. But then, in the winter of 2019, a small mistake threatened to expose my father's work. One of the scrapyard employees, a man who had been loyal but careless, mentioned a shipment of metals to a local buyer. Rumors travel fast in a small town, and suddenly I felt a flicker of panic. If my mother or Ryan caught wind of this, years of careful planning could unravel. I spent nights pacing the yard, thinking through every angle. How quickly could someone claim a stake? Could they track the purchases, the lands, the metals? It was more than fear of losing money. It was the betrayal of everything my father had built in silence. I realized that patience wasn't enough anymore. Observation alone couldn't protect what had been hidden for decades. I needed to act, but discreetly. Carefully. Intelligently. And in that moment, I made the first internal decision that no one else would ever see. I would protect his legacy, and mine, no matter what it took. Protecting my father's secret required more than vigilance, it required sacrifice. I had spent years quietly learning every pattern in the scrapyard, cataloging metals, tracking lands, observing my mother and brother from a distance. But now I realized that even small comforts could compromise the plan. I gave up nights out, friendships that demanded attention, even my personal relationships. Every penny I earned outside the scrapyard went back into research, into maintaining the metals, into securing the lands. There were moments I felt the loneliness acutely, birthdays, holidays, quiet nights when the apartment above the junkyard felt impossibly empty. But I never complained. Never told my father. The most painful decision came when I declined a scholarship opportunity that could have taken me far from this town. I explained simply, I can't leave yet. The work isn't finished. Inside, I felt the weight of the world, missing my youth, missing freedom, but I understood something crucial. To inherit, sometimes you must first surrender. And every night, as I locked the doors and glanced at the steel room, I whispered to myself. This sacrifice is not wasted. Patience wins. By 2021, everything was aligned. The lands my father had purchased, decades of quiet, overlooked deals, were exactly where a massive tech company wanted to build a data center. $24 million, all in a single offer. The metals he had carefully extracted, platinum, palladium, rhodium, gold, silver, were worth another $9 million. Every detail of the accounts, every property deed, every transaction had been meticulously documented by the lawyer. I stood in the scrapyard that Saturday, listening to the clang of metal against metal, feeling the weight of years. The trap wasn't flashy. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches. It was invisible to those who thought they had one. When my mother finally learned about the fortune, she tried to challenge the will. But every step she took played directly into the system my father had built, and I now controlled. Financial records, decades of evidence of abandonment, anti-contestation clauses, every piece locked her out. She realized too late that the man she had called garbage had built an empire. And I, the girl who stayed, was now holding the final key. The only question remaining, would she ever understand what she had truly lost? The day my mother saw the lawyer's documents, her composure shattered. She read every line, every transaction, every note detailing her abandonment and lack of presence for 19 years. Why wasn't I even considered?" she whispered, voice trembling. The lawyer didn't answer. He simply handed her the final clause, 100% inheritance to Lily Carter. Ryan, too, sent a message apologizing for leaving, admitting he had chosen the wrong side, finally acknowledging the years he had wasted chasing comfort instead of loyalty. I met him at the scrapyard one Saturday morning. 7 a.m. sharp. No dramatic speeches. Just work. He showed up, sleeves rolled, hands ready to learn. For my mother, there was no invitation. No second chance. The door to the fortune had closed. She left quietly 11 days later, defeated by a system she thought she could manipulate, by a man she had underestimated, and by a daughter she had dismissed. For the first time, I realized the full weight of my father's words. Those who stay are the ones who inherit. And now, finally, I understood, this inheritance wasn't just money. It was justice, patience, and quiet triumph. I sold the lands to the tech company for $24.1 million. The metals brought in another $9.2 million. $33 million in total, but I didn't sell the scrapyard. Every Saturday, I still walk up the creaking stairs to the tiny apartment above the yard. I still smell the oil, the rust, the rain-soaked metal. I still hear the clanging of engines and the subtle music of a place built on patience, hard work, and quiet observation. The world outside might call it garbage. To them, it's nothing. To me, it's everything. Ryan works beside me now, learning the lessons my father taught me, learning that value is never obvious. I could live anywhere, wear anything, chase status or comfort, but I stay. Because the true inheritance isn't money. It's the knowledge that those who endure, who observe, who stay when it matters most, are the ones who inherit life itself. I sometimes think of my mother, living in her polished house, realizing too late what she abandoned. And I smile quietly. Because she left trash. I inherited everything. Those who stay are the ones who inherit. And now, finally, I understand why staying was the only choice that mattered. If this story made you feel the power of patience, strategy, and quiet strength, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people see stories like this. I'd love to hear from you. In the comments, tell me about a time you stayed when everyone else walked away, or a moment you proved your own strength in silence. And if you want to follow more stories of clever, unstoppable women who turn the odds in their favor, subscribe to the channel now. Every story will remind you that staying isn't weakness, it's power.